you know, still talk and chat with all of us, okay? So about our organization. So Ikahi Mediation Center is a nonprofit community mediation center. So we serve East Hawaii. We were founded in 1983 as a program of the YMCA. And then in 2006, we became our own independent nonprofit. So what we do here is we empower people to come together, to talk, to listen, explore options, and to find their own best solutions. So to achieve this mission, we offer mediations, we offer facilitations and trainings, kind of like this one, to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. So we have this brown bag talk every third Thursday. It's free, it's open to the public. We used to be able to do it at the Office of the Prosecuting Attorney, but now we are offering it on Zoom Live. And if you miss this, hopefully we'll have a replay. So we're recording this right now, and we do upload it on YouTube if it's a good video. Because sometimes I don't catch that. I don't catch it. So, but in the recording, it is just recording the speaker. So, so if you don't want to be on film, that's okay. You won't be recorded. But if you do, just to let you know, if you do talk, or if you have your mute off and there's any noise in the background, what's going to happen? It's going to highlight you, and then your face is going to be on the video. So if you would keep yourselves muted, and because that will keep you off the video okay. So you can, like I said, this is every third Thursday, so please do feel free to sign up for future events. You'll have an opportunity to give feedback in an evaluation. I'm gonna pop in a link in the chat box at the end of the talk. So if you could just click on the link and take the short evaluation, it's really, really helpful for us. What it does is that it allows us to keep this workshop free and open to the public. By collecting the evaluations, then we see how we're doing. We get new ideas about other speakers, and then it helps with our grant reporting as well. So it's really helpful if you all take that evaluation at the end, and it's super short. So and I'll pop the link at the end of the talk. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nina Sabahi. She is currently pursuing her BA in psychology and BS in cellular and molecular biology at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. She has training, passion, and interest in improving and facilitating communication, and uses that as a peer tutor at the university. She enjoys learning as much as she can and giving back when possible. Nina is also a professionally trained volunteer mediator here at Ikahi Mediation Center. Hi, Nina.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Majida. And thank you to everyone for joining me today. I hope that there is some valuable takeaways. I'm gonna go ahead and start the share screen. Okay, and then everyone can see the screen, yeah? Okay, perfect. So this presentation is about giving effective feedback. And I guess before we get really into the meat of things, I just wanted to give some background about what inspired me to give this talk. One of my professors at UH is really emphatic about this concept of giving and receiving feedback. And I've been in her course. I've taken classes with her maybe like 4 times at this point. Every time it's always emphasized. And for whatever reason, it took a little bit to click for me. Like, she introduced the concept, and then I think it was maybe even like a year or 2 later that I was finally like, oh, wow. It dawned on me like how valuable and transformative this practice is. And I guess on a more personal note, not too long ago, I had myself been the recipient of some feedback in the workplace where I definitely needed to hear it. It was, really valuable in that sense, but I felt like the delivery of the feedback was somewhat lacking. And I was just imagining, someday I anticipate, maybe I'm going to have an employee, and I really wouldn't want anyone that I'm working with to leave a meeting with me feeling this way. So from there, I kind of began to conceptualize, okay, so what are, some systematic steps that we could take to prevent these kinds of things from happening? So with that being said, what we're going to be going over today is basically the concept of feedback. What is it? Why is it important? Why do we use it? How is it valuable? And finally, how can we give good feedback? How can we give feedback that the person is going to take away something from and not, not push back against, not be like, oh, I don't really like the implication here. I'm not going to engage with what you're saying, right? Because that's, unfortunately, that can be the case sometimes, right? If someone is hearing something that, they're not really comfortable with hearing, or it's not presented in a way that's palatable for them, oftentimes people will just shut down, and that's completely normal. So yeah, in the interest of avoiding that, we can kind of hone our feedback skills and avoid those kinds of occurrences. So the formal definition of feedback is basically information given about a person, a product, or a task, which is used as a basis for improvement, that's a very fundamental point, and we'll come back to that later. But there's feedback in like all kinds of different things. There's feedback loops. We have them in nature, in biology. Sometimes there's like an enzyme, and the presence of this enzyme will then result in this substrate. And then the more substrate there is, the more enzyme there needs to be. And there's like these biological feedback loops. There's feedback loops ecologically between organisms, and in all kinds of different ways. But the feedback that we're focusing on today, of course, is more communicative, but they're all like analogous in some respects, right? Like ideally, effective feedback is encouraging behavior that's desired or mitigating behavior that's undesirable. So in the interest of doing that, giving better feedback is going to result in better outcomes. So there's different kinds of places where we can give feedback. Feedback, oftentimes we see it in the workplace. That's one of the main ones, performance evaluations, those kinds of things. In education, there's feedback about assignments, academic performance, and even in our personal lives, we can give feedback to our friends, to our loved ones. Sometimes it's valuable to seek feedback from, people that are close to us about like, oh, how did I handle this? Like, what's your take on this behavior? It can be really illuminating and valuable. So I mentioned recently to one of my bosses, I have a few different jobs, so I'm not like outing anyone by saying this, but I mentioned recently the nature of this topic to one of my bosses. I was like, oh yeah, I'm giving a presentation about feedback. And he was like, oh my God, he was like, I need to go to this presentation. He actually wants me to do a training with just like the management team over there, because he's expressed that he just feels like he's really bad at it. Like he says that, when he gives feedback to employees, they're like crying, and like, it's just not a good time for anyone. Like, I'm sure that's super unpleasant for them. For him also, maybe not to the same extent, but he doesn't want to be making people cry. But I tried to remind him, like anything else, giving feedback is a skill. So if you're not like versed in this skill, if you haven't practiced the skill, if you haven't been trained in it, it's like anything else. There's not really any way to be good at it. So it's not like a personal failing of his or anyone else's that they can't give good feedback. It's just simply a matter of like being trained in this skill set and practicing the skill set. So actually a little bit later today, towards the end of the presentation, I've set aside some time for you guys to practice these skills in like a very small, like it's not like a huge anything like that, but just a brief role play to be able to enforce like what you've learned today and then to actually apply it. I feel like that's like in terms of retaining information, I feel like applying it like right after learning it is one of the best ways. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, so basically it's like a skill like anything else. You know, you wouldn't expect someone to just be good at basketball all of a sudden without like training in that skill and practicing it. So feedback is very much the same. So feedback is also, now we're getting into like, why is feedback valuable? Giving feedback is actually an evidence-based practice. Research indicates that giving feedback can actually result in more positive outcomes in academic settings and workplace settings. There's like a pretty large body of research about this, but it's important to note that the research does indicate that how the feedback is delivered is a salient factor in what the outcome is going to be. So we'll get into more of those factors later, but it's important to keep in mind that it's not just the act of giving feedback in and of itself is what produces the outcomes, it's how the feedback is delivered. So feedback is valuable because I don't necessarily want to make a generalization, but I believe in almost every case that any human conflict essentially boils down to a miscommunication at one point or another, whether it's like on an international level, like a trade agreement is breaking down, or interpersonal with like between friends or romantic partners. Usually if you boil down a conflict to its like root element, it's a miscommunication. So being more versed in these kinds of skills and giving feedback and being able to say, oh, you know, this behavior is needs improvement without miscommunicating that and creating like a conflict or resentment is incredibly valuable, because that allows us to avoid those kinds of conflicts and also to be able to offer something that's ultimately really beneficial for those around us. Something that's ultimately really beneficial for those around us. So I have a little bit of a thought exercise before we go into the feedback strategies. I just want you guys to take a moment and maybe think about the last time someone told you something about yourselves, whether it was in the workplace or in a personal context, and think about, was it something that you needed to hear? And then how did you feel hearing it? What was your reaction? Do you feel like that information could have been delivered differently? And if it had been delivered differently, what the effect would have been on your reaction? So if you want to just take a moment to think about that. And then if there's anyone that wants to share after, but I'll give you guys about a minute to just consider that and reflect on that experience. Okay, so if everyone's had adequate time to kind of reflect on that, is there anyone that would like to share the fruits of their reflection? Okay, that's totally fine too, if not. It's definitely a personal thing. And basically I just wanted to have us be in the frame of mind to think about, to start thinking like in that kind of way, like how people are expressing things and how they can be different and how that changes our feelings about those sentiments that they're expressing. So one of the things that I like to recommend prior to giving feedback is checking in with the person. I don't think it's necessarily very beneficial to offer unsolicited feedback, because oftentimes you're catching someone off guard. And it's nice to be able to like honor the person in that way and be like respectful of their time, in the sense that you're making sure that they're emotionally available and available in other ways to be able to receive feedback, right? Because if someone is not if someone's not in the space, maybe they're having like an exceptionally bad day. And here I come, I'm ready to give them feedback. I don't know that, and I could just be heaping on to like an already bad situation. So I like to, when possible, obviously in some cases it's not going to be possible. But when possible, I like to recommend just asking the person, hey, can I offer you some feedback or something to that effect? Just so they have the option of being like, yeah, sure. And then that kind of gives them more agency in the matter too. It's not, they're more of an active participant in the process versus just being like a passive recipient. So that's something that I like to recommend. And then prior to giving feedback as well, I like to kind of clarify where you're at mentally, right? Like feedback is not meant to be punitive. It's not meant to make someone feel bad or punish them. So sometimes it can be the case where if someone has really, messed up or disappointed us in whatever way, whether it's in the workplace or in our personal lives, there can be like this tendency to want to, I guess, maybe zing them back or maybe do a little bit of an attack. And feedback isn't really about that. Like it shouldn't be weaponized. I've seen it happen. And it makes me sad because I'm like, I have such a high regard for feedback. So when people do things like that, and then in the spirit of, oh, this is feedback, but it's actually not offered in that kind of a way, I'm just like, no, you don't besmirch feedback like this. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to make sure you're in the right space to offer the feedback, right? So if you're feeling upset or feeling like you want to be lashing out at someone, which are natural feelings and they happen to all of us, I would say that's fine, but I would just recommend waiting before offering the feedback and making sure that you're in like a pretty neutral frame of mind to be able to do that. Also, it's helpful to imagine like what you would like the person to gain from receiving your feedback, right? It keeps the scope of the conversation more focused if you have like a clearer idea of like, okay, this person, I'd like for them to come away from this conversation doing this more often or doing this less often, or just having like a concrete idea of what the takeaway is going to be. Because oftentimes we do want to have a more, I don't want to say myopic, maybe not myopic, but a more succinct scope of what we're addressing when we do give feedback, because it's not really feasible to address too much in one session, right? Like we're all human beings and we're capable of receiving feedback, but it's the more feedback there is in a single time, the more difficult it is to be open to receiving it. So really focusing in on what you'd like the takeaway to be from your feedback helps you keep focused too on what you're expressing to the listener. And another way of kind of framing this experience in your mind is looking at it like an offering. Like this is actually something that's going to benefit this person. And I think kind of looking regarding feedback in this way, like this is a gift for this person, kind of keeps us in the spirit of like, this is for their benefit, right? This isn't to hurt them. I'm not trying to punish them. I don't want to make them feel bad. This is for their benefit and so that they can improve in whatever way they need to. And that brings us back to the definition, which is that feedback is used as a basis for improvement. So when framing the feedback experience, that's kind of how we want to regard it, as like, this is a positive thing for the listener. This is something we're giving them as an offering, almost as a gift. So that can help to minimize, any underlying tendencies that we might have to inject some things that don't need to be in the conversation. So in continuing with this spirit of like how we can kind of prep our minds to give effective feedback, the next few things I'm going to be getting into are kind of, they're honestly like they deserve presentations in and of themselves. So I'm just very surface level, just scratching at like the ice of a glacier. But unconditional positive regard is it's a very transformative worldview. And even if you don't subscribe to it overall, using it in these specific contexts of giving feedback really can make the experience a lot better for both you and the recipient. So I'm going to go into what unconditional positive regard is and what it entails and how you can kind of, again, even if you're not going to change your whole life and subscribe to this orientation, just using it momentarily in this framework really can shift the experience. So it's a theoretical orientation in counseling psychology. It was developed by Carl Rogers, who's a humanistic and client-centered therapist. And basically, suppositions of unconditional positive regard are that we accept people where they're at. So this is kind of a contradiction, I suppose, right? On the surface, it would seem that, oh, well, we're giving someone feedback, so clearly, you know, they're doing something that's unacceptable. How can we accept them? That brings us to the next point, is that people are not their behavior. So even if I'm offering someone feedback and, you know, I'm letting them know this behavior may need to change, it needs to be altered in some kind of way, I can still divorce that from who they are as a person and still accept them where they're at. So that's kind of how we can reduce that dissonance there. And unconditional positive regard also supposes that everyone has a natural tendency towards growth, improvement, and self-actualization. So keeping that in mind while we're offering feedback kind of helps to maintain the focus on, like what I mentioned earlier about this being a gift and an offering. Like, you're doing something that is going to empower this person towards their natural tendency of improvement, right? This person wants to improve. That's the assumption of this theory, is that they want the chance to improve. They want the information to improve. So by giving them feedback, you're actually facilitating that process for them. Neurolinguistic programming is another theoretical orientation. Again, we don't necessarily need to subscribe to the entire rationale, but there's some pretty profound takeaways within this framework that are really beneficial for giving feedback. So neurolinguistic programming as a therapeutic orientation is somewhat contested. It was developed in the 1970s, but it's not an evidence-based practice, and it's kind of regarded as a pseudoscience nowadays. So that is something to take into consideration. However, I think the next point is valuable regardless of, you know, these origins, whether or not it's like pseudoscience. The idea that, which this is one of the core tenets of neurolinguistic programming, is the idea that everyone is doing the best they can with the resources they have available. So this has just been like a profoundly transformative thing for me. I've accepted it into like my whole like framework of life. Like, I try and use this with everyone in every situation. And I guess just as a brief aside, as an example of how this is like powerful, is I work in fast food. So when I first started, I would like be, you know, it happens sometimes. People are like kind of rude in the drive-through, or, you know, something goes wrong with their order, they're unhappy. So I would like get upset initially. I was like, you know, how could this person like I'm a human being, you know what I mean? How could they treat me this way? But then I came across this concept. It took a little bit for it to sink in, but once it finally clicked, I was like, wow, okay, that person is obviously, you know, I don't know their story. They are probably having a bad day. I'm assuming they wouldn't want to treat someone like that, but they're coping with like so many different things in life, as we all are. And in that moment, that was the best they could do. You know what I mean? If they could have done better, I'm sure they would have. Like, no one wants to be rude to people, really. No one wants to hurt people. It's just, that's where we're at. And, you know, that's like the best people can do sometimes. So this idea is really, really, it's like shifted all like my frustrations, and like I still get frustrated with people, but reminding myself of this has been completely like, yeah, this concept is a blessing. But in the context of feedback, that's keeping this in mind allows us to kind of remind ourselves that, yeah, this person, you know, even though I need to give them feedback and, you know, there's something that's like dysfunctional or going wrong, they're doing the best they can. So that helps us maintain like a degree of compassion and understanding that will be reflected in the feedback, right? Like if we're delivering the feedback in a way that's rife with this spirit of understanding, this spirit of compassion, that's going to be a lot more digestible for the person that's receiving it. And then this is just another thing to remind ourselves too, that oftentimes when something's going wrong in our life, that element doesn't exist in a vacuum. So things, going back to those feedback loops earlier, like things often will affect each other. So if someone's having a performance problem at work, the odds are very good that that performance problem is not like only resultant from something at work. There's like a constellation of things that are happening and they're all affecting each other. So just reminding ourselves of this as we're giving feedback is another way of maintaining that compassion and understanding that's gonna enable the person to really hear what we're saying. And on that token, this is kind of an iffy area for some people. So if you're feeling capable of it and you want to actually discuss what is the challenge, like I just mentioned the problems that can sometimes result in behavior that needs feedback. So it can be valuable to give your feedback recipient the space to kind of open up and say, yeah, you know, this is what I've been going through. You know, like, yeah, I've been having this performance problem. This is going on at home. This is going on in this other area of my life, and they're all coming together. But I would caution that if you're going to pursue this, that you be prepared to really actively listen and engage with what the person is saying, because this can backfire wildly if you're not in the space to be able to listen to them and be compassionate and understanding while they're expressing their concerns. It's going to definitely undermine the quality of your feedback, because it's going to make them feel dismissed and not really heard. So basically, if you're going to open them up to expressing themselves, if you're going to encourage that, then just really be receptive to that. And on that token, that brings us to how would we do that? This is another thing that, again, is like a whole presentation unto itself. So yeah, this is not comprehensive by any means, but I'm trying to apply these things in a way that you can take little pieces and hopefully use them as a foundation to build for your feedback practice. But so if you do want to open up the floor to your recipient and, you know, explore what's been affecting their performance, what's been resulting in this need that they have for feedback now, active listening is going to be the way to do it. So active listening, basically you're being attentive with your body language, with you're using eye contact, you're like making like affirmative sounds, like even if you're not necessarily saying something, like, oh, like just letting them know that they have your attention and that you are listening. Asking questions to clarify your understanding, asking questions to help them explore the situation if you want to, and help them clarify their feelings. And then reflecting back to the person that you understand what they're saying and that you have correctly like grasped what it is that they're trying to convey, which is particularly important if it's something sensitive, right? So an example could be like if someone's describing like a challenge at home, like, you know, oh, I hear that, you know, this is really affecting you and your ability to, you know, be on time to work or whatever it may be. But yeah, so this active listening definitely merits like a further investigation if you're interested. This is like way too cursory of an introduction, but I just wanted to kind of throw it in there for if you did want to pursue that with your feedback recipient, if you wanted to give them the space to be open with you about what's going on, then this is definitely the way to do it. So now we're gonna get into more of the more cut and dried aspects of giving feedback. Like the previous things are more of how we can like mentally prep ourselves, like what kind of framework we can be in to be the best giver of feedback. And then these are more kind of like quantitative, objective kinds of things that are gonna make our feedback more effective for the listener. So the first one is just to be consistent. So if there's a problem that arises, maybe you don't need to acknowledge it in that moment. Maybe you don't need to like give them feedback immediately, right? Like as we discussed, that's not always possible, and people aren't always available. But it's important to not be to be genuine about it, right? Like if something happens and you're like, oh no, this is perfectly fine, this is great, no problems here, and then now you're trying to give them feedback about that same thing, that's just kind of like a confusing incongruence that's going to put people off to the experience. So it's not necessarily that you have to, you know, stop everything, address the problem right then and there. You can say something to the effect of, okay, like, yeah, this is okay for now, we can discuss it later, or something to that effect, just to let the person know that, you know, this is something that I'm going to have feedback about, instead of making like everything is like perfectly fine and there's no conversation to be had. So that's important because that kind of preps the person to be able to receive the feedback at a later juncture. The next one is timeliness. So this one makes sense and is pretty intuitive, right? The sooner that we address things, the more salient that feedback is going to be. If someone at work messes something up and I wait a few weeks, I wait 2-3 weeks to bring that up to them, it's kind of lost the recency of like, sorry. So like in psychology, there's like a primacy and recency effect. And so we tend to remember like initial things and the most recent thing. So after a certain amount of time, this whatever incident was doesn't have the recency, and in your listener's mind, they've probably forgotten a lot of the details. They're probably not able to even put themselves back in the state of mind they were in when that happened. So it's a lot more futile, I would say, because it diminishes your ability to effectively address the behavior. And the whole point, right, of feedback is to offer the chance for improvement. So the longer you wait to give feedback, the less that chance for improvement exists. And then the last one, I call it an upward trend, but it has many different names. This one is probably something that most people are familiar with. It's like, it goes by the sandwich method or ending on a high note. But basically, when giving feedback, we do want to, you know, give the person something nice to take away for themselves, if possible. I'm sure there's certain instances when that's simply not possible, but I think that it really makes everything a lot more digestible if the person can leave the meeting or the conversation feeling like, okay, you know, I have some things to work on, but I got to hear some nice affirmations about myself, and it almost serves as motivation to work on the behavior that needs improvement, right? Feeling like, oh yeah, well, okay, I'm good in this respect, and now I'm going to be even better in this other respect that needs work. So that's just like, you can start with one good thing, give the feedback, end with another good thing, or however you want to do it, but just generally ending on some kind of a positive note, and going back to that recency effect, right? And the primacy and recency effect, if you end on a positive note, then that's the recency. So they have that in their mind. Yeah, and so this is a good way to keep this in mind, is just reminding yourself, how would I want to feel when I leave this conversation, right? So we want to feel uplifted, which ultimately is the aim of feedback, right? It's a positive thing that's supposed to uplift the person. So we want to encourage that by ending in a way that's going to allow for that. Okay. So at this point, I think Majida has sorted the participants into breakout rooms. So I'm gonna allow for you guys to kind of practice these skills a little bit, and see, you know, what ways you can apply them. There's no like one script that you can give everyone, because it's such a personal process, and in order for feedback to be meaningful, it needs to be, you know, in your voice. So I'm reluctant to just say like, oh, here's what you say, you know. So I want to give you guys the chance to kind of experiment with this in groups of 4. So I'm gonna send a prompt to the chat, and then what I'd like is for just so we don't have to think about who goes first or who goes next, we're just gonna go in alphabetical order. So the first 2 people alphabetically can do like a brief role play of the scenario that is in the prompts. And then after a few minutes, I'll message you guys another prompt, and then the next 2 people can do that. You can do the same prompt or the other prompt, doesn't matter, but as long as you get the chance to kind of practice these skills. So before we do that, is there any questions that anyone has?
Oh, hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Nina. Thank you so much for that presentation. I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here. My name is Emma, and you know, I just moved here to the Big Island about a year ago, and I'm really excited about this mediation clinic because I myself am a certified mediator from California. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on a little bit is that one of my favorite key points for an effective mediation is party self-determination. So the reason why I value party self-determination is because I understand the notion of feedback, but sometimes I get concerned that people misinterpret the notion of feedback for criticism. So, you know, criticism is criticism, however you want to dress it up. And, you know, sometimes when we feel like we need to give feedback, what we're really feeling is the need to give criticism. And it's sometimes far more effective to allow the party to sort of come up with their own solution, which is why I value the concept of party self-determination. And a lot of that is because very, very few people know how to give proper feedback, because most people give criticism. And a lot of the reason why they give criticism is because they have an internal notion of what they believe is proper behavior or proper, just how they feel you should behave, right? So there's like so people have they have a notion of how they believe people should behave. And so if, for example, the person they're talking to doesn't conform within that mindset, then they feel as though they have to change them. Whereas party self-determination is more about, okay, let's dive into the real crux of the issue. And why do you feel this way? What are the emotions? Because in every conflict, for example, there's always a core emotion. Every single conflict in the history of everything, there's always a core emotion. And by focusing on the core emotion, we're able to then resolve the conflict. And that's why I value party self-determination, because rather than telling them, hey, because that's when you talk about that feeling of leaving feeling bad, like when I remember the last job interview I had, and most employers, they actually conduct job interviews with like a 2-person system, right? So it's almost like they have like a bad cop, good cop, where they have one person giving positive feedback and the other one giving negative feedback. And they do that because they want you to conform to a certain way, but in reality, they don't want you to leave feeling bad. But most people leave job interviews actually feeling bad. Very few people leave job interviews or even what they call constructive criticism situations feeling good. So, but by talking to people about their core emotions, or let's say, for example, somebody disappoints you, and rather than saying how you want them to change, you then say instead, the reason why I feel disappointed is because I feel this way about what you did. Because then that way the person can then reflect on their behavior, and it becomes more of a party self-determination aspect as opposed to being told what to do. And you actually end up leaving the situation feeling better because you feel as though you participated in that process, as opposed to somebody telling you how to act or how to behave. So I guess that's my only comment. Because when I hear the term feedback, I myself am very critical of the word feedback because of the fact that I think most people confuse it with criticism. And that's what, and so if we're to leave a job interview, we should leave that job interview feeling better about who we are and how we want to change and how we want to be better employees or better managers or whatnot. And because, you know, when you think about it at its core, encouragement is far more effective than criticism. So for example, if I criticize somebody about what they did, they're going to leave that being more mad at me than they are actually thinking about what they did. Whereas if I encourage them, if I say, well, you know, like, you know, I really like this, or if I, you know, you're amazing, or, you know, you're really smart at this aspect, if you provide encouragement, then they're going to then want to focus on how they can, you know, fine tune that thing that they did that was so great. That makes sense. I don't know. This is, I guess that's kind of my this is why this is kind of why my number one rule for mediation is always party self-determination, because I do believe that people should feel proactive in the discussion. They should feel as though they're making the decisions. They're making their own, I guess they're making their own self-criticism, I guess you could say, their own feedback. They're creating their own feedback for themselves. And because like, so for example, when someone says they need to give feedback, then they're saying that they don't approve of what the person is doing. They don't approve of their behavior. They don't approve of either, for whatever reason, whatever they do, they don't approve of it. So that the need to give feedback is I don't necessarily, I don't think people should need to give feedback. I think people should want to allow the person to, you know, to come up with ways that they believe would be most beneficial to them. But this is just kind of how I think that, I guess this is trying for me to understand feedback versus criticism in this respect.
Right. That's actually a very salient point, because a lot of times people do have that tendency to, like I said, like weaponize feedback as this way of like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, you need some feedback and I'm gonna tell you what's what. But that's why I like to employ those mental techniques of reframing it as like a gift. Like, you're doing this for their benefit so that they can improve. Because sometimes, unfortunately, it is the case that, like, I don't want to pathologize anyone's behavior on a personal level, but like sometimes in the workplace, there's things that are unacceptable and do need to be addressed. For instance, like the prompt that I have for you guys is about tardiness. So if an employee is repeatedly, you know, late for work, or there's some kind of other performance problem, while there's not necessarily any like moral aspect to that being good or bad, it's not really functional for that situation. So in that case, then we come to how can we address that in a way that's not gonna leave the person feeling like criticized or like worthless. So that's where the feedback comes in.
Okay.
But yeah, on that note, if you guys want to,
I think this is great. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, so on that note, if you guys want to experiment with that prompt a little bit and see, you know, kind of what that would be like in real life. I think we have the breakout rooms prepared. And so, okay, perfect. So Majita's gonna give you guys an invitation to the breakout room, and then I'm gonna send a brief prompt, and yeah, you guys can.
I think, Nina, you have to put the prompt in the prior before they join the breakout.
Oh, okay, I'll do that now. I'll send both prompts then.
Okay. And then for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know why my thing is not. Ah! Oh my word. Okay. Oh. Okay, here we go.
All right. Here we go. So Nina, you're gonna get actually placed in a breakout room as well. So, okay. But anyone in the breakout rooms can they can pop back out. Like if you find that there's the folks in your room cannot interact because of their device or whatnot, then you can always just come back into the main session. Okay?
Okay.
And then you got it? All right, see you soon.
Thank you, guys. Hi, everyone.
Hi, welcome back.
We back.
It's elevator music.
So we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon, but I just wanted to, before we kind of close things off, see if anyone wanted to share any of their thoughts about the simulation or the role play.
Yeah, Emma's a mean boss.
I thought that was I gave him we had fun.
We're getting feedback about the feedback here.
Yeah, it's so meta.
Yeah, we both left the session feeling pretty good about the session.
Okay, great. Yeah. Did it kind of help to clarify for you, Emma, like the distinction between like just telling someone something because you're upset and want to like bring them down, or versus offering them information that's going to improve them and their lives?
The first thing, so when you first started the meeting, the first thing you said was that you had just had a situation where you left feeling bad. And I knew exactly how that felt, because that happened to me more often than not, where I would leave a situation feeling worse. It's like, so basically it's like you enter the situation already with high anxiety, and then you leave the situation just feeling terrible about who you are. And I don't think that's a productive way to do interviews. And I know that most employers do it a certain way, and I just don't, I'm starting to think that that's not effective. Like, you know, so I really appreciate that you started it off saying that you left feeling bad, because I think that at the crux of it, that really is the center focal point of a bad feedback situation, right?
Right.
If
Yeah.
situation feeling bad, it means that you received criticism as opposed to actual feedback. So the fact that you started this entire session saying that I left feeling terrible, that to me was like, yeah, that's it. That's what we have to fix. People leaving feeling bad.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we're all human, like you said, and we all do things differently. And you know, Ben and I had a great discussion as why he was always late. And so, you know, and rather than me yelling at him, you know, I thought it worked out. So I had fun. Nina, you're fantastic.
Thank you. Okay, great. Well,
Amy, I didn't get to talk to you because you don't have a mic. I'm sorry, Amy.
So we're coming to the close of our time here. So Nina, do you have any other last thoughts or things that, you know, some feedback you'd like to have from participants?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for participating today. I'm really honored that you guys came, and then I am seeking feedback about my feedback presentation. So Majida put the link in the chat box, and then I think there's also going to be a follow-up email with some resources for you guys if you're interested, with another link to I'm like saying this word so much, feedback, but the feedback form, which I would really appreciate, because I have obviously a huge reverence and value for feedback, and I love seeing it and growing from it. And also in terms of the Mediation Center, it's helpful for the grant funding and everything like that. So
Can I give feedback, Nina? Can I give feedback? I thought this session was so fun. I thought it was so cool how we like broke into meetings. So I thought everything about my feedback to you is this is great.
Oh, right on. Well, thank you so much.
Yay. So we do share the evaluation form with Nina. So all of the evaluations, we compile them, you know, they're all anonymous, so you can be honest too. And we do share it with the speakers. So So we actually really do appreciate honest feedback, and you know, I think we're pretty tough. We can handle it. So I really appreciate each and every one of you for coming. For the folks who really do join often, I really appreciate you. This is great. It's like a little small community because we can't be together in person. So you all folks showing up and get to see a little tiny window into your homes or your little backgrounds it's really great. So I appreciate it. And please do give take the evaluation. The link is in the chat box, and feel free to join us again next time. Thank you. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.